As an example of sort of this Falun Gong activism in China that ties into this particular thing, why don't you tell us the story about, is it called the Chongqing incident? Or
Yeah, the Chongqing broadcasts. So this was a remarkable story. There was a small group of friends in Chongqing City, which is in northeast China. And this is shortly after the self-immolation, and they were seeing all the propaganda going out, and they're seeing what's happening in their own town, their own community, where everybody's turning against Falun Gong. And they think, how could we possibly counter this? If people are getting this through their TVs 24/7, sometimes literally, on state-run airwaves, we can't compete with that. How do we actually reach these people? And so this small group of people who are, not technical at all, came up with a way to tap into the state-run airwaves and broadcast their own programs across all of Chongqing City.
They wanted to hack Chinese state-run media.
Yeah.
If I were in their shoes, my first thoughts would be, how do I get out of China?
Yeah. It was a remarkable feat, both technically, but also in terms of extremely dangerous, because what happened is very instructive or informative is immediately after the broadcast. First of all, it was a very interesting reaction. So the broadcast goes out. It lasts almost an hour, right?
They got in.
They got in across, I think, 8 different channels. So Chongqing City, more than 1 million people kind of thing, saw these broadcasts.
And the broadcast contains?
The broadcast contained mainly 2 things. One is they said, Falun Gong is freely practiced all around the world. Here they are in Paris, the United States, because the story by the state-run media is that, Falun Gong is evil and it's probably suppressed all around the world. So suddenly people get to see, actually, China's the only place that persecutes Falun Gong. It's free to practice everywhere. So that was the first message. And the second part of that program was going into the very specific details about the self-immolation and showing how the state-run media lied about it. So this is very threatening to the CCP. So the immediate reaction is interesting because there was a lot of people in Chongqing who thought, they didn't know the TV had been hacked. All they do is they see these programs and they think, the persecution's over. There are people even went out into the streets and they're like celebrating, they're congratulating their Falun Gong neighbors. Hey, it's done. We're good.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
That lasted only for a few hours. Very quickly, and this came from the very top, Jiang Zemin, who was in charge of the country at that time, ordered a massive police military presence in Chongqing. People were rounded up very violently. Amnesty International issued an urgent action just days after that when they saw what was going on. I mean, it was literally police sort of mobilization in the city. All the core team were rounded up and tortured horrifically from this incident. Yeah.
They're not still alive.
They're not. All 6 of those, the core team, eventually died in custody inside China. And we, there's several things to note about this story. And that is, one, it started like broadcasts in other Chinese cities. So other people then started to do this around the country. And I think perhaps more important, equally important, I would say, is that Falun Gong community in the West, who are technologically savvy, from this incident gained the idea that, we should do the same thing for the internet. And they started to build what became the most useful and effective tools for people inside China to safely get out of the Great Firewall and be able to reach the free internet. All this sort of reverberated from this one event in Chongqing.
And now you guys recently published like a mini documentary on that called Airwaves.
We did. It's very short. It's 10 minutes. It's called actually Defiance in the Kingdom of Fake News. And it takes you through this whole story and then also shows you a little bit of the effects on. I think there's a message here that might resonate with a lot of people because it goes to the heart of what's wrong with extreme forms of censorship and propaganda. And I think that's something that a lot of people around the world are facing greater levels of. And so that documentary not only covers this event, but it talks about that larger issue. And I think it's quite interesting. I recommend everybody take a look at it.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the description and comments.
Great.
Below.
Great.
I mean, Levi, I know that you can't. I mean, this is kind of like going back in time and being like, what if? But what kind of strikes me about all the things you're talking about in terms of Falun Gong civil disobedience, from, doing things like trying to hack into the Changchun cable channels to just, doing these underground print shops, to kind of this like massive attempt in the West to like get this human rights information out of China, that, if the Chinese government, if the Chinese Communist Party had not gone after Falun Gong in 1999, what would Falun Gong be in China? Like, do you think it would have become like this kind of massive challenge to the Chinese state?
I don't think so. I mean, what's interesting, that was an interesting time in China in general. In
The 90s, you mean?
Well, particularly the later 90s, because they had started opening up with trade and those things, but also there was an opening up of the systems, the judicial system, for example, in terms of transparency and trying to bring some sort of civil ways in which to govern and the country. So the whole country was kind of, I would say, going in the right direction a little bit. I mean, granted, they're starting from a very bad place, but going in the right direction. And this, what's one of the unfortunate things about the persecution of Falun Gong, it was so systematic, is all those steps of progress and all those mechanisms were completely reversed, because now the sole focus of the entire regime was to stamp out Falun Gong. So, for example, any advances they had made to bring transparency to the judicial system, out the window. Now they went back to the party decides what the verdict is going to be before the trial is even held, because all these Falun Gong people need to be thrown into prison and throw away the key. So all this sort of went into a complete reverse. Now, had that not happened, just looking at sort of the small steps that China was making, I think we'd be looking at a very different China. I think it would be a place that perhaps Falun Gong would have, much like you see in Taiwan, where Falun Gong remains hugely popular, widely embraced by the government. And you wouldn't, I think one of the things that would have come to pass is you wouldn't have had such a dangerous actor on the world stage. It really could have contributed, I think, to a much more sort of open, civil China, as opposed to what we have now, and as opposed to the ramifications of having that actor on the world stage we have now.
I mean, I've heard the line from the Communist Party that Falun Gong was trying to overthrow the Communist Party. So, in the late 90s, when Falun Gong had 70 million or 100 million people practicing, right? Like, did they have an anti-Communist Party message? What was it like in that environment?
Not at all. And I think the important thing to note on that is looking at the timing of the state-run media talking points. All the way up through the late part of 1998, the Chinese government was saying the same thing, which is this practice is great because it's saving us a huge amounts of money on our healthcare, and it's making people healthy, and it's bringing balance and sort of harmony to our communities. Great. Keep doing what you guys are doing. It wasn't until Jiang Zemin decided, okay, we're going to stamp out this group so I can consolidate my political power, then the talking points changed. Now you have stuff like what you were just talking about. Oh, they were trying to take over the government. Oh, they're funded by the CIA. Oh, they come from aliens. I mean, whatever, all the stuff they came up with.
Come from aliens?
None of that was at play until after the persecution started. And that, I think that's the real indicator, is that they just had to come up with something, because how do you formulate a cohesive story about persecuting a bunch of peaceful Buddhists? You got to make stuff up.